Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Munson Steve. Welcome to another edition of the Rolling Out News Report. We are definitely having a phenomenal week, and obviously everything has changed in everybody's mind. There are those who, like Judge Penny. Hey, Judge Penny, how are you? You gotta unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. How you doing?
Bam! Come on, man. Anytime I can hang out with powerful, beautiful, dedicated servant of the community, I mean, what else can I say?
Well, let me thank you personally for publishing my op-ed about what was
I needed one last week. I needed another one last week.
Oh.
We can't get enough of your voice.
Well, I appreciate it. And I thank you for all that you guys are doing, because you stay on the cutting edge of everything that's happening.
It's a tough time. For us, we probably want to be a little closer to the fire than we are. But given the risk, obviously, you don't want to put your people in harm's way. It is close. We get close to the fire, but Lord knows we can actually be closer. So, but we need to hear about your vision for our community, because I think how'd you come up with that title for the article?
Oh, I Dare You, America. Only because everything that really needs to happen happens because of young people. It happened in the 60s because of young people. As we know, the civil rights leaders were of a certain age. And even if we go back to those who were enslaved in the rebellions that took place, those took place with individuals who were young. And so to think that when I wrote it right as politicians and all of these people were incensed by our children, young people, getting out and protesting. And so it was almost when I was watching the protests and they were painting and calling them thugs, even our people doing that. I thought, I dare you. And so that's where it came from. I dare you, America, because this country has been built on protests, First Amendment rights. But it's First Amendment rights when it's certain people who speak a certain way. And then when it's us, suddenly it's anarchy or it's a problem.
Yeah, it was, I think it frightened some people, even members of our community.
Yeah, it did. And it was strange that it would frighten them, while at the same time, we had individuals with AK-47s. They had these machine guns. They had all of these weapons going into state houses, and suddenly they were just protesting. But imagine if those same people with the same weapons and the same garb, and they were African-American or Black, would it have been pictured the same way? All of that is that same systematic racism that we have been having to deal with. And it was almost as though, like everybody else, I have been gracious enough about this long enough. And we have been navigating it, and we have been being politically correct long enough. And it just seems like it took young people to let us know now is not the time to be gracious nor politically correct. Now is the time to speak truth, almost like James Baldwin did, unapologetically, but he did it in a way to uplift and enlighten. And I think that's what's been going on for most of us.
Now, what comes to your mind when you say James Baldwin?
Oh, everything comes to mind when it says James Baldwin. That brother was everything. Do you hear me? I think he was before his time. James Baldwin, as we all know, during that time with the Harlem Renaissance, and there was this discussion between the view of W.E.B. Du Bois and what his thinking was with making certain that we assimilate, where you had Marcus Garvey and that group that wanted to, they called them the Niggeradas, where they wanted to say, no, we want to keep in our own communities. We don't want to do it. Now, we know that W.E.B. Du Bois, after he came here to the AU Center, kind of changed his thinking. But all along, James Baldwin was being told by W.E.B. Du Bois and those thinkers that if you're going to write in newspapers, if you're going to use your creativity, we must do it in such a way that makes the white people respect us. And James Baldwin said that for me to be imperfect is for me to finally be free. And that for them to see us in our humanity is for them to see us as we are and not as we create ourselves to be in order to bend or mold toward them. And so once I remember reading James Baldwin as a young woman, and I thought to myself, that's why I am uniquely the way that I am, not a nonconformist, a person that wants to do things kind of my way, because that's how they have always controlled our consciousness, by making us have to believe that everything about us, they rename what we are. We can't have Black communities. We have to have urban communities and inner city communities. Everything about us is always an other. And James Baldwin was saying, no, he, Langston Hughes, there were a group of them. And they were saying, no, they're going to have to accept us for who we are. Now we know history shows that W.E.B. Du Bois came around. And when he came around almost like a Marxist in this incredible way. But that's sort of like the evolution that happened with Malcolm X, as you know.
I like to know and learn and know again. See, those that don't want to know it all already, I want to know. And it's not sharing and caring if, you're not exchanging. It's all about an exchange.
Yeah, there's always been, people are looking at us in our community. There's always been this thing between the elites, bourgeoisie Blacks, and the people who were, say, the working class people who were out here. And whether it's associated with skin color, remember, everything in our life, everything about our consciousness is controlled by white supremacy and what has happened in the evolution. So I've been studying so that I could really understand what happened in Reconstruction. 2,000 offices. We had Black Wall Street. Well, we know what happened in Tulsa. We had newspapers. We were everything. What could have taken place? And it didn't just happen with whites. And we know that when the federal government pulled the troops out of the South, we had no protections. And then the very laws were the ones that were used against us, right? We all know that. And when you don't have the law backing you up and you don't have the force of the federal government, then it sort of took a turn that was enslavement, but called by another name. And then it went from Black codes to Jim Crow to really where we are now, because we've been out of enslavement in a shorter period of time than we have been enslaved. And so what they did for us is we came up, I think, with this mindset of tokenism, where you and I are the beneficiaries of the civil rights movement, which meant that Dr. King, they all did it to have us have the right to vote, and so that we can go on in business, make us some money. We can go in and be the first in various institutions. And what took place there was we sort of played the game to get along. In other words, we felt like if they're playing Monopoly and we're playing dominoes, we better learn how to play Monopoly or we're not going to make any money. Because you and I both know, and most people know, that without economic power, you have no freedom. And so we looked at it in a different way, but there was a whole nother group of people that were left behind. And so then to me, what happened is we have a group of elected officials that, because we wanted to be the first, all we cared about was putting us in place, but we didn't align our interests with their motives for being elected officials. Hence, you had people that brought nothing to the table. They likely ran for office because they couldn't get a job anywhere. You're not having business people and smart intellectuals and run for office. You have people who had nothing to lose that would go and run. Hence, they would be co-opted by whether it be the business community or whomever, because in some way they were really working class poor in poverty, because they were using the money that you would get from being an elected official as their income. They didn't bring anything to the table. And so we are now suffering from, not because of our own doing, we did the best that we could, But I think that the people who are in office have not done all they could do, because it has to be changed by the law. If we don't have the law, I don't care how many executive orders we sign, how many policies we put in place. This thing is so entrenched that the only thing they understand is the law and accountability. And without that, now we adhere to the law. We're the first people to go to court. Oh, we just think the court's going to be the answer for us. If I can just get to a judge, and think about how many times the law has been used against us. So the good thing about history is that when you go back and look at history, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Boy, you thinking now, I tell you.
No, I'm admiring your discussion and appreciating the discussion. I hope that as long as I can, I'll be thinking at least the noodle's working. But at the same time, when you are expressing facts about our community, I just enjoy hearing it, because it's a proud moment for us. I was really shocked because one of my friends called me and he said, "They're making us look bad. They down there protesting. This ain't Atlanta. This ain't Chicago. They're gonna be stealing stuff." And so I'm listening. And I'm trying to, what you saying? I say, bro, you might want to put some different glasses on that. It's just not your movement.
Yeah, that was really good about, not only glasses, he probably had blinders on. That's that W.B. Du Bois talk. That was that talk that, I understand the era. We grew up saying, when I speak, we speak for all of us. And we took it personal when someone looked a certain way. Well, we with another generation, and we thought they were indifferent. I know I certainly did. I started teaching a class at Georgia State called Race and the Criminal Justice System. And when I walked in that class, do you know, many of them didn't even know any of the civil rights leaders. They just had no clue. And I remember an African-American student sitting in the back of the class, and she raised her hand, and I was talking about the enslavement of our people, and they kept calling them slaves. And I said, no, you don't refer to those individuals as slaves. We were enslaved. We were not created and born to be slaves. It's incorrect to say we were slaves. We're enslaved people. So she said, those people aren't attached to me. Who are they to me? That's a story. Y'all need to get, a Black young lady saying this to me, y'all need to just kind of get over that. I'm not being disrespectful. And I took a deep breath and I just listened. And so what I did was I went back and I tried to share the experiences of what they must have been experiencing and tie them to what they were experiencing now. The disparities in every aspect of our life, not just policing, criminal justice system, economics disparities. We're still redlining, something that took place in the 1920s, a federal law that came out to be able to say certain areas were bad. We're still from the 1920s using laws. There I go back again, laws, to redline banks. 10 times African Americans going to get loans. Takes us 10 times less times when we get the loan. Housing, every aspect, healthcare. And I went through everything. And then I decided, let me let them talk. And so I had them to write down the lyrics of some rap music or contemporary music. And then I had them to bring it. And then I started to recite James Baldwin and Langston Hughes. And I started to tell them that, imagine for all of these years, we've been fighting the same battles, but let me listen to you. And then when they began to speak, I knew that it was bubbling at the surface. They said, oh, we're not gonna vote. And if Bernie Sanders doesn't win, we're not gonna vote. And they had no relationship to the power of voting, because even when we put them in office, they don't give a damn about us. And so that's when I started making the correlation between it's a new day in terms of who we put in office now. Dr. Lowry, who was my mentor, said, everybody who is your skin is not your kin. And what he meant by that is you got to put the right kind of Black people in office if you're going to put people in office just because they're Black. Now, I'm not saying we ought to do that, because I want to see Joe Biden win to get this beast of a man that we have in there now out of office. But what I'm saying is we have to be more intentional the way they are. They think about the courts and they stack the Supreme Court to have an ideology because they're ensconced in their views. That matters more than anything, even more than, well, some of them are racist. Now you've got a hardcore 30% that's probably racist. But then you've got some that's ensconced in these views of the Second Amendment, abortion and all of those. So they stack the court. So they're willing to put up with the idolatry and the immorality and everything that's going on, the buffoonery, the incompetence of this leader we have in order to get what they want. But we have never been strategic enough. So guess what the big talk is now, Mr. Steve? The big talk.
What is it here on Rolling Out News Report with the famous Judge Penny? So let me know.
Who's going to be the vice president instead of being strategic about what we want from the future president? We're spending more time trying to figure out, because all we do, remember, we're stuck in that age of position and title. And so if you're going to support somebody, what's the agenda for us? And then they get mad when we come up with a Black agenda. Well, if we don't come up with it, then how are we supposed to get what we want? And so I laugh at it because I'm thinking to myself, here we go again. All we care about is a few people getting a few positions, and it doesn't funnel down to the people. And so I think what the young people are doing, and I love young people, they keep me young, is because it's a bottom-up approach as opposed to what we've been doing. We believe that if we get one of us as vice president, we had one of us as president. And although I'm a big fan of the president, he and I are 2 months apart in age, I think he was the right man for the right time. I love his wife and his children and the symbolism of what he meant. But it was because he was there and we didn't have a strategic plan, because we were just excited for the symbolism, that we're in the fix we're in now, because the pendulum swung, and then look what we ended up with: racism at its highest in the White House. And so I just think there's some lessons that we can learn in terms of being a little bit more strategic and not reactionary. Dr. King said that we had about 10 days of outrage while we had to capture the minds of the people. Well, guess what's happened? Dr. King must be looking down from heaven, because it's been over 20-something days of protest. And although the news media, you're covering it, the news media is not, unless we burning up, tearing up, or doing something. They have been protesting nonstop. And I don't know how you feel about it or how your friend feels now. I'm just praying every day that they don't stop. Because if we let this go this time, I think we're going to be set back quite a bit. We've got to keep the pressure on. What do you think?
I think a lot. I think what you think is the most important at this moment, Judge Penny. But just, you asked me a question, so I don't want to ever ignore your question. The friend still wasn't quite certain. Took him probably about 5 days. He took him a minute when he said protest, and I say, well, no, it's an uprising. He said, it's a protest and not an uprising. I said, you really gotta get your lens so you can see that where your role in the movement is. You are not a frontliner, but you have a role in the movement, and it's not for me to tell you where, but you need to have a vision for yourself. I said, because you don't want your time to be marked, and it will be marked, that you really didn't get to participate in this movement. I said, and your children are going to want to know what you're doing in the movement. And he finally kind of got some better glasses
Mhm.
but I'm still not certain that he's confident that there is an uprising. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people want to be in denial. And if you're not involved to see that people are pushing industries, like, nobody thought the next phase was the Confederate flags and the statues. It wasn't on anybody's agenda. They thought it was just going to be police. And then all of a sudden they said, oh no, we still had these things to deal with. So I think there are more things that we be dealt with. I think there are things that have been coming up. Um, I was talking to a young man who was part of the movement in Minneapolis, and he said nobody is safe from us.
Hmm.
Those are his words. He was like, and he's asked me what I thought, and I said, well, I guess you mean everybody's under evaluation.
Mhm.
Everybody's under reevaluation, and I think we're seeing a ton of reevaluation
Yeah.
at this moment, Judge. It's a moment of reevaluation. You're having to, and led by justice, and also led by a pandemic. So if you aren't thinking of your health in a pandemic, then you could really lose at this moment. So I think that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's good. Very thoughtful. I think it's a time of conscience, and every one of us can play a role because now what we have to do is we have to speak up from wherever we are. Some people of a certain age can't be out there physically. That's what we use the young people for.
Right.
But the young people are going to need us to strategize because we have access to power, at least more than what they do. Yes, they can press from where they are with regard to um, putting pressure on them to take monuments down and things like that. But there will have to be a collaboration. And I guess the whole point of I Dare You America is to say, in order to have a collaboration, and we know collaboration is the new currency, it's worth more than any amount of money you can have. If we have access to legislation and the electorate, we either go with them or we'll get pushed aside. And I think that's a good thing because we've been comfortable for too long. Too many of us have been holding certain positions of comfort, and it is because too many people became too comfortable with Black people being dehumanized and brutalized that nothing has been happening. And so they better get on a side and pick a side. So you either a racist or an anti-racist, and you either speak up or get out of the way. This is the young people's perspective. And then our job is to be able to help them strategize. Now, a lot of people in the civil rights movement have been saying, well, they don't know how to do it. Well, hell, we didn't show them how to do it. We held on to the position so long that we didn't want anybody else to get in. And so we have generations of people that's doing the best way they know how to do. They use social media better than we know how to. And because of the pandemic, we've been forced to learn how to use. So now we do have a means of communicating with them because they've been communicating. They may appear to be unreasonable to other people, but they are saying that I've watched you all manage this and you all have not done a very good job of it. I see a few of you with certain titles. I see a few of you on board. I see a few of you. We buy more cell phones than anybody else, yet they have the audacity not to put us on their boards. Oh yes, I see a few of us who give us tokens of changing the box of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. But yet that doesn't mean anything to me. Why don't you tell me how many people you're going to put on your board of directors and how many people you're going to make senior management? So young people are so authentic that they're bottom liners. And they're saying, wait a minute, we've been on this train with you all. You've been doing it your way and your way has not worked. And now it's our way or it's the highway. And I really believe that they're giving us the push that we need because but for this push, there are elected officials that believe they own these positions. And they believe based on ego that they forgot about the people. They just forgot. And they think they do a favor for people when they entertain us or they speak to us or It's just become a self-grandizement, almost celebrity about this thing. And young people are not going to have it. Mary Pack Hector is a young lady I have mentored. She is one of this up and coming, if not already there, Spelman graduate. And she's planning marches every day. I'm in touch with them because I'm energized by them, because I think that this would have gone on another 50 years, but for two things happening. Well, let's go with three things. Number one, I always say, because you remember now, I'm also a minister.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
But God, don't, evil always goes too far. First of all, always just get so comfortable. It just always goes so far. Number two, that person we had in the embodiment of racism is Donald Trump. And we took too long calling him out for what he was. The press had a fascination about him. And he took up every bit of air there was to take up. And it was almost occultic because everyone around him became cowards because he pushed the limits. When we keep acting and operating within our set of norms, he didn't. And so he took advantage. The pandemic made us all stop and say, wait a minute. And the way the genetic form of this coronavirus is, the younger people have the antibodies or the immune system to be able to withstand it, which meant that we had to stay in, which meant that we had to sit back, which meant that they went on and took over. So it was the perfect storm for transformation. The revolution has begun. Not only has it been televised, it's been on virtual, it's been on everything, because but for our young people, and I believe that, that's why I feel so confident in saying this, nothing would have changed for years to come, not at least in our lifetime. I believe that.
I believe pathetic change would have occurred.
Not progressive change.
You know, Judge Penny, the all of what you said, yes. But I think the comfortable are more uncomfortable. And I think the methodology and use and things that, I think for me, my friend was not anticipating any change. And then he didn't know what change looked like. And I think that we're gonna see change. I mean, things are being dropped in different places.
Yes.
And so the conversation, NASCAR does something different and unanticipated. Even to get Joe Biden closer to the finish line, in one night, everybody got out the race and said, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Unanticipated. I mean, people, I think we've got to be louder about the liberal Democrats that aren't really liberal and are racist in their own right, and definitely part of the privileged class. So it's part of the conversation. And I think all of them are under evaluation. So, and reevaluation. I think that's happening. I think people are going to watch. I think, even future leaders probably want to take a pause to how you're, being funded, who you represent, because people are going to continue to do a lot more microscopic evaluation of who your supporters are and who really funded your get out the vote, and did you have a Black person there? So I think some of our people are going to be very uncomfortable as the evaluation on where is the money going in this party. The party spending money with Black vendors. How many Black consultants? And why aren't you asking? How many Black media companies? Why are we begging? I think the conversation is going to be so real. And then it will make it to some mainstream media. quietly. Sometimes they don't mean to put them on. A person speaks truth to power. Um, Mothers, um, the mother of the child did a whole Emmett Till movement. She said, "No, no, no, no. You're gonna see this baby that y'all did this to.
Jet,
That-
yes.
it- you're gonna see this. You're not gonna deny. Now that I've had to live with it, the mothers to me, the tears on their faces, obviously fathers too, but the mothers to know that Ahmaud Arbery, DA convinced you your child was something that you didn't. They told him he was somebody you didn't know. And it turned out not to be true.
Hmm.
So her conversation with whomever, God, was who was that they were talking about? And it turns out now he had a videographer attend the execution and murder of her son. But she went to bed thinking when they buried him that literally something else had happened.
Yes.
A theft. It just the to a miscarriage of justice is a miscarriage of humanity.
Yes, it is.
So I think that when you say that, many things more are going to happen unanticipated.
I believe that. And I think it's not necessarily change as much as it is liberation. And how do we define liberation? And those who want to be liberated will be, and those who don't will not be. And so you're right. And I think the best part about liberation is the fact that it does come like that. The Mississippi state flag, my husband is from Gulfport, Mississippi.
Mm.
And I remember he and I talking this morning, and he said, "Can you believe it?" And I said, sometimes you just got to sit back and say, the more we try, because popular culture is something, and the power of people rising up is something else, because people will move where the rise of the power source is going. And I just think that this intergenerational, interracial movement, because it is interracial. You look out there and their children are picketing or protesting, if you want to say. I think it's different. That's why I started the article off saying something's different this time. That was, weeks ago, I could feel that something else was going on here. And I think for us, we better get all we can get while the getting is good, because what ends up happening, and it being in this business, the page does turn eventually. So then what do we do to keep it on the foremost of everybody's consciousness? And that's where I think strategic planning is going to come in, because with liberation, I believe that things are going to unfold, and they're going to unfold without us knowing they're going to unfold. Because just like there is white privilege, there is white guilt. And we cannot underestimate the power of guilt and people knowing that they were the beneficiaries of something they did not earn. They're good people that know that. And because they have the power, it would be incumbent upon us to let a group of us make the demands. When you think about in the civil rights movement, you had Dr. King, the eloquent orator, the one who would always make you proud. You had Hosea and Hosey's boys who kept the stuff going. You had the intellectuals in the C.T. Vivian, and then you had the diplomacy and diplomat of Andrew Young, who didn't want to go to jail, but who could speak with everybody. And so just looking at all that it took, it wasn't just one group or one kind of flow to make this thing happen. So I do agree with you, and that's a good point, that it's going to come from a lot of different places. It ought to come from the academy. I would like to see HBCUs stop using a white European curriculum to teach our children. Here we are, historically Black colleges still using the white curriculum. W.E. Du Bois was fussing about that even back then. Nothing has changed other than maybe Black studies. Let's adopt that. We can take it, not just policing, but even something as simple as bail. I'm getting a PhD in criminology. Next year I'll defend. And one of the reasons why I'm getting this, and I'm writing another piece that I'll be sending to you and it's called A View from the Belly of the Beast. And the belly of the beast has been the criminal justice system, and there were those of us who thought that we could work it from the inside. But what I know about bail reform, what we've been doing, and I credit Black churches and everyone, they've been raising money to get our people out of jail because of bail. When we know now that 70% of people who are sitting in jails right now are sitting there because they can't afford to come out on bail. 2/3 of those individuals are Black and poor. And so the decriminalization of poverty is critical to what's going on. So yes, we can fight the police, but from the moment they enter the system, we have sort of just agreed that, oh, it's okay to have cash bail. No, we don't have to do that. There are many jurisdictions that don't do that. Another thing, every 3 minutes in this country, someone is arrested. 95% of all arrests are for minor offenses. Only 5% are for major offenses. Of that, 68% are African Americans. We're only 13% of the population. So we're disproportionately represented based on petty, low-grade things. The person at the Wendy's for Rayshard Brooks, he fell asleep in the car. Last time I checked, a DUI is a misdemeanor. So a man lost his life over misdemeanors. Same thing that happened with George Floyd. Last time I checked, first of all, police wouldn't have even been called over an allegation of a fake $20 bill. In other jurisdictions, police write out a citation. So if we just focus on one element, I think that's what they would want us to do. When there's so many other phases, Black judges, I'll give you an example. In Louisiana, we have more Black judges on the bench in Louisiana than any other place in the country. Yet we have more people of color, Black people, incarcerated there than anywhere else. So the research that I'm looking at is, what is it about our consciousness that makes us different, that not only do we sentence at the same rate as other races, but sometimes at a higher rate? Now we know internalized oppression. So the only thing I think I want to say more than anything is, I think I'm happy that the young people are protesting. I think the press plays a role. I think we all play a role in getting the word out. But I think we have to understand that this thing is so embedded in the fabric of this country that we need to dispatch, just like we have the Divine Nine. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And just like we have all of these thousands of people in our sororities and our links and all of our organizations, why don't we bring all of the best minds together and divide up each one of these areas and create legislation from the local level to the state level to the federal level, and mandate, look, if you want our vote and our support, will you support this body of legislation? And I think if we handle it from that way, then perhaps we can deal with this beast of racism.
Not yet.
You don't think so?
Well, I respect what you say. I think what you say is key. And most of the time when I'm doing this show, and I appreciate you coming on, rolling out news reports, so come often. But there is a issue related to economics.
Oh, okay, I haven't even talked about that. That's a separate.
Yeah. And so the economics creates desperation and poverty and lack of independence. I mean, it is very difficult to be independent. It is very easy. A friend of mine asked me, he say, well, such and such just got $100 million. He's talking about an athlete, brother. And I said, well, that's real good, but he really didn't need $100 million. He has $100 million. So it's a decoy. You had 10 that needed 10 million each, and and he needed a billion because he's a bigger guy, But they give us these small numbers. So for us, as an example, Disney just wrote off $500 million that they invested in Vice Media.
Mm-hmm.
But when you ask what was their investment in Black-owned media?
Yeah, but the law could do that. See, we have $137 million still on the table from that payroll protection plan, still sitting there. But there are businesses, guys who own an auto mechanic place. They don't have a relationship with a bank. But the legislators who were negotiating that deal could have said 100 million goes in our community. 200 million of that goes in our community. You did 2 trillion. Why can't we have 500 million? They could have codified that in law. There can be economic, the whole criminal justice piece is just over here. But I am a believer that you cannot have freedom without economics. Power, you just can't have it. I grew up in poverty, and one of the things that I did, that's why I'm not on the Fulton County bench right now. I did family court with Judge Penny, because the one thing that I thought I could do for my legacy of my mother, who died young because she couldn't get a heart transplant because of poverty, was to never be in poverty. That I would never, ever have to owe anything, ask anybody for anything, and I wanted to take my family with me. And so, but that was something that I did from me understanding that. Number one, there are people that don't believe that people ought to at least make $15 an hour. And I have a whole thought about what we can do with economics as well. I mean, I did the criminal justice part, but I think that we allow them, through the use of affirmative action, putting certain people on the Supreme Court, to take over the narrative of what equality looks like and to put us on the defensive. What I mean is that they were saying, if you want to be equal, then they should not give you any start, or you shouldn't get anything extra. But we're all that, because it was never equalized. It's like we're starting a race and you get to be 1 mile ahead of me in the race, but yet you're telling me when we get to the finish line, somehow, if I don't run as hard as I can to catch up with you, I should be allowed to be 1 mile ahead of you. I should be given certain things, but we've let them control the narrative. There are people that are afraid to ask for money. If you talk about money, they vilify money, and they demonize people who believe that we ought to have money. And I just think that we need to do a better job in educating our people about relationship with money. I always look at economics very differently. If I gave $10 million right now to you, Mr. Steve, I get $10 million and I take Joe Blow off the street. There are people in our community, the first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna say what they're gonna buy. If your relationship with money is the first time you get it, you wanna get and give it back to someone else. Money turns over in our community less than any place else. And so the average person in our community will take the money and say what they're gonna buy. That means they're giving it away. Then there are those, maybe like me, or maybe how I used to be, I'll use mine for security. I want my child to go to the best schools. We want a good house. We want a nice car. That's security. But people like yourself, people, and I think I've kind of moved over to you. We don't ask, what am I going to get? Maybe a little bit. I don't know. We don't ask what I'm going to do with my money. What am I going to do? How is the money? How am I going to take that money and use it to make more money? And that would be either for altruistic purposes so that I can help my people, or I can have sustained, because sustainability with economics is what we need. We got a lot of people that get some money in their hand, whether they're rappers or ball players. We need sustainability in our community that passes it on from generation to generation. Because obviously with free labor, they had the opportunity to build wealth where we did not. And so you are completely correct, but I think it's diversified. I think it's in many measures. I do believe though, and I have to say that I believe economics is at least half of it. And I think the other half has to do with criminal justice and all the other issues. But I think we got to do some educating. And I just really do in my mind, believe that too many of us have forgotten about our people. I just think, this pulling up by our bootstrap, what happened to the beloved community in which we feel an obligation to help other people? That maybe that's my weakness, but I just somehow believe that any greatness that's bestowed upon me is so that then I can help other people be great. And but I know for me, I couldn't live broke. I can't live with lack. I feel powerless that way. And somehow that's a consciousness that we have to put in people, as opposed to saying you get something to go buy something. No, true power, that's when they listen. I'm scholar in residence at the Apex Museum. Mr. Dan Moore, for 42 years, has been the truth. Mr. Moore will not take money at that Apex. If you or your corporation or anyone had ever had enslaved individuals, he will not deal with anybody like that. But Mr. Moore taught me something years ago. They know us better than we know us. And therefore, when we think the way they think, then we then can conquer and deal with them. Because in managing and enslaving us, they took such power over us that they taught us how to think. And one of the things we did not value was economics. And when we have a few people that do, we sit in awe of them. And we look up to them, and we think, wow, that's them. The person in Trump got into office because they felt he was economically sound. Although he had many failed businesses, we still don't know what he has, because I don't think, have you seen his taxes? I don't know. Has anybody seen his taxes? I don't know. He was a good man to talking about. I bet you got money now though. I know he has that. But I just personally think, although when our politicians or anybody in office or anybody try to make some money, they're better to lock you up because they're threatened by that when it all comes out with money. So I think I agree with you. I don't think we're talking differently. I just think it's where we want to put our priorities. And I just think at this point in time, we need to put it on all fronts. We are Black genius in every way. We have so much every way.
Every way. So we weren't talking on different streets. We're on the same street. It wasn't a dialogue of if then not that. So it literally, I think it's KPIs, key performance indicators for every industry. It's key performance indicators, healthcare. It's really coming out so that we're reset on the issue. So I know you have a story coming up for us, Judge Penny, but I think it's even having the 10 KPIs for the criminal justice, just 10. Like we need 10 that we can all, say out loud.
Yes.
And have as we want to end, and I'm just giving an example, end cash bail, and here's why.
Yes.
So when a person says it, we know why you want to hear it. And this is the other for criminal justice. We want DAs that do not answer to the police.
Perfect. Qualified immunity gone. Correct.
Right. So once we can articulate our 10 from an intelligent, African-American, qualified, studied, committed community, servant like you, then we can find solace in a place, in a reservoir, to actually move as a community through your voice, through your knowledge, through your expertise. Because we don't need to have to Google that. We need KPIs and criminal justice are distilled down so that, because many people don't get that. And I think we say cash bond and then equitable community service. So you can't get me for 280 hours for $280. I have to literally be making at least $10 to $20 an hour if I'm going to be even on probation. Because many individuals in our community, they'll say, oh, yeah, you can do this. And it is 280 hours for $280, or the ticket. You can't have a ticket and have a fee and a fine for something that is cruel and unusual. So how can a speeding ticket be $500 and $600 and $700 in a small community? So you're gonna have to come back. I want you to know that you are always welcome. But work on my KPIs is give me the belly of the beast and my criminal justice KPIs, because I want my community to know their objectives so that they can measure themselves against your vision. They have to be able to measure themselves. We cannot be a community that cannot measure itself, its accomplishments, its vision for itself in a written and articulate way.
Well, I look forward to doing that. I am an entrepreneur as well. I always have been. I was that little girl in 6 years old bringing candy to the school and selling it. I own a makeup line, and I've always had multiple revenue streams, and we need the same for business and entrepreneurship as well. And so I'll start out with criminal justice, and then we'll come back with some business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's on the same street, but I'm just making a quest for the.
I will take care of that. I can do that.
The criminal justice KPIs. We when you study the law, pass the bar, you can put out a shingle, and we want our community to have a whole lot more shingles than they have right now to collect money versus spend it. Much love to you, Judge Penny. We will see you back for more Rolling Out the News Report. Talk to you real soon, and I'll be in touch about my KPIs. And thank you for all that you do and give. You're a key, shining sister with superpowers, and definitely a person dedicated to justice for all.
Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Peace. Hey, we are here. We love her. She is so dedicated to our community. We really want our community to move forward. In order to do that, we need to understand there is a new vision for healthcare. We've got new reports on where healthcare, what color of women and the women of color and those overlooked, innovation, investment, and development. We've got great guests coming on to explain what's happening. And I want our community to understand this is also part of the movement. So welcome.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
I thought I was going to see two more people, but what's going on, Denise? How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm having a phenomenal day here at Rolling Out News Report. It's
good. That was a good conversation you just had.
Just Penny's an innovator in that area for sure.
Yeah. I love the fact that she's also an entrepreneur that has other kinds of businesses too.
Yeah, I think we all should have something.
Yes. Multiple streams of income is what I call it.
Definitely a repository of options for sure. Financial options are key.
Okay. Hey, Fard.
Y'all know each other?
Yeah. We're the co-authors of the report.
You mean y'all writing reports?
We're trying to do a little something.
You know, here at Rolling Out the News Report, we want intellectual capacity and information to be part of what we disseminate. So we've got two great co-authors, and Fard, we're going to let Ms. Pines actually describe. You are now watching the seat at the table, which is where we want to disseminate information so that our community understands what they deserve, what they need to be demanding, and what the truth is that they need to know in order to move their families forward and their futures forward. So thank you both for coming on to the seat at the table.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So can you tell me about your study, Denise? We're here.
Yeah,
We got to see.
absolutely. Yeah. So the report we did is called Fem Aging Health and Tech Report. And we did this because we felt that right now we need to raise the awareness of women's health and let people know it's more than just about fertility. What happens with women as they get older, the 40 plus women, that is a growing and economically powerful group. But unfortunately, their needs and their wants and their desires have been ignored, partly due because women's health has been focused mostly on fertility and parenthood. And in our report, it reveals like that has been the focus, because when you look at the report and you see how many things that women are as they get older, and I'm talking about 40 to 65 is where we focus the report on, at the age of the women, you'll find that they have so many worries about whether or not they're going to remain healthy and active and independent as they age. And that's because currently they don't feel that there's any signs in their healthcare that's getting them there. And they're especially concerned about things that we don't want to talk about, like vaginal and bladder health, sexual health, and then mental health. And mental health is really on the rise. We did another report looking at these women and the impact COVID was having. And they're even more worried now that COVID has hit. So they were already worried before, but they're really more worried. And so our goal was to take this report and to focus it on the health preferences of older women. And I'll let Farrar talk about a little bit about sort of, what sort of kind of has been revealed in the report, why innovation and why health combined.
Just a question for those who are watching the seat at the table. The title of the report is, Denise?
Fem Aging Health and 2020, Fem Aging 2020 Health and Tech Report.
And who and what brought together, who funded the report? And because everybody needs to know that this is an important document and where they can find it and how.
Oh yeah, absolutely. People can, it's a free report. You can download it at femaging.com, FEMAGING.com. Real easy, Fem Aging.
And who funded the report?
So Wise Paws, which is an entity that is owned by Tea Botanics. I'm a co-founder of Tea Botanics. It's a medicinal tea company. And we created Hot Flash Tea. And it was, created out of the fact that I ended up having a hot flash and I didn't want medicine to cure that hot flash. And so partnered with my doctor. And he knew about this tea. We went to Taiwan, we studied the tea, we met with tea experts, met with organic farmers, and fast forward, we created this tea. And out of creating a tea, what really ended up happening was I started to learn about women's health as they go into this sort of what we call perimenopause to menopause phase, where most women don't talk about it, right? You start experiencing this around between 35, 38 on the lower end, but usually by about 40, you've got numerous symptoms. But because, nobody wants to get old, we live in this society where everything's fast and everything's young. And if it's not fast and young, then we don't want any part of it. And so as we get older, we tend to be forgotten because we're driven by this fast and young society. Even when you look at advertisers only want to deal with, the 18 to 35 group, right? That's what they have an interest in. And yet those folks don't really even have the money. They've got to actually go to their parents, right? The 40s, the 50-year-olds to buy the things that they want. And so I'm hoping that one of the things that we do with regards to this report is start to create a conversation in the tech industry about focusing on these women and focusing investment on these women. And more importantly, focusing small businesses, startups and current businesses to focus on this aging group of women because they have money, they're going to be working for a long time, and they want to be healthy while they're doing that.
I didn't ask her anything, Dale Fry. She had a whole lot to say. Thank you for honestly sharing and sharing insight, because I want people to know where you're coming from and how we got here.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having both of us on the program. Denise and I have been working together now for, I think, 4 years or so.
Yeah.
And in terms of my background, I do a lot of work in future trends in healthcare and technology. I've been working in that area since 2005. And one of the things that I specialize in is trying to give people a sense of what's happening tomorrow. And Denise and I were talking about this issue of women's health. And I was looking at some of the data that I have access to, and I was finding that everyone was, from a women's health perspective, was talking about women's health, and essentially everything would end at the time of motherhood or parenthood or fertility. And, personally, I have a mother, I have 2 daughters, and I have a wife. And I think about these issues because it affects my wife and it's going to affect my daughters. And what I found is that too many times in the technology space, there are a lot of people that are ignored, there are a lot of people that are overlooked, and older folks, older than 40 years old, what I was finding in my work is that that they're just completely under-recognized. And so when Denise and I were talking about, well, what can we do? What can we do about this situation? We said, well, is there an opportunity to talk about aging in a very positive way, and in a way that not only highlights the problems that people are facing as they grow older, but also solutions. So with FemAging, the FemAging report, and what I like to call the FemAging project, it's really designed to offer 3 things. The first is really good data on what older women are thinking about from a health and wellness perspective. The second thing that we wanted to do was to really take a close look at women of color, African-American women, Hispanic women, and Asian women. Because in the time that I've been doing this work in the technology area and business, very, very rarely are the needs of women of color even mentioned. And so what we explicitly decided to do in the research was to compare and contrast what women of color actually want and how they're thinking about their healthcare versus white women. So that's the second thing. And the third is we wanted to say, well, are there products, services, and innovations that are specifically focused on women ages 40 to 65? And what we found is that there were very few innovations that are focused on these women, and the investment is not focused on these women. And we also looked from a product and service perspective at what women of color, what African-American women want from these solutions. Because too many times in the innovation work that I've done, and I've worked with organizations all over the world, and what I tend to find is people focus on the product, they focus on the innovation. Look at this new gadget, look at this new innovation. But they rarely ask, well, what do the people that the innovation is focused on actually want? So with FemAging and the FemAging project, what Denise and I have looked to do is to change the conversation around aging to focus specifically on women of color in a really in-depth way. And we have a lot of data on what women of color want, and to accelerate innovations that are actually relevant to women, whether they're women of color or women of other races. So really appreciate you having us on the program to talk about this really important project and the way that we're trying to do this in a very positive and nuanced way, so that people can not only understand what the issues are, but understand the path forward.
Yeah, so can I just jump in a second? So I guess we should...
You can't.
So I just want to say really quick, we coined this word. This is not a word that's in the tech community. We coined the word FemAging the word that's in the tech community is femtech. But when you look at products and services that are part of femtech, they're all about childbearing years. So fertility, pregnancy, and parenthood, and they end there. And when we talk about fem aging technology, we're talking about software and diagnostic tools, devices, nutraceuticals, so nutrition, clothing. So we kind of stretch it beyond just tech, because there's innovations in nutrition and there's innovations in clothing. And we'll talk a little later about a couple of the companies that we actually highlight that we call our FemTech 20. And we'll tell you a little bit about that. But I just wanted to make a clear point about, like, we coined this word. This is a word that now will start to be used, because we're going to start having conversations with investors, conversations with businesses about focusing on this 40 to 65 group of women.
It's heavy. I think it's great work here at the seat at the table. We want to talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. Our conversation obviously is economical, but for me, this entire uprising, if it doesn't lead to us having real KPIs, then I am going to be so disappointed with everybody that I meet at the seat at the table. Like the fact that we're going to use data to kind of showcase you're not really investing in any Black women over 40 company B, but you're siphoning off their economics. Mm-hmm. You have their store in their neighborhood. You literally have no innovation center that is even considering bringing any of their children in. You are not financing. You're not figuring out how to repurpose one cell phone so that it can share and be the device that leads to us moving this digital divide out. You're not forecasting a future with the lens that is Black or brown or yellow. So I have no clue. I'm not a big data guy in terms of understanding that, but I am a basic numbers guy, and I can do fractions. So when it comes to that simple math, I can look at a P&L. I know what EBITDA is. So I have some idea about a few things. And for me, I want my community to know more, particularly on the things that you're talking about. So we got another 20 minutes. Let's go for it. So.
Okay. Farrar, do you want to talk a little bit about KPIs on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Denise and I have a few different KPIs that we keep top of mind. The first is we looked at the overall investment level in fem aging technologies, whether they're directed toward women of color or not. And we found that there was a striking disparity between the level of investment, $2 billion in fertility and parenthood related innovations versus about $400 million for fem aging tech innovations. The interesting thing about this is that there's a disproportionate focus on fertility and parenthood, even though the proportion of the population of women of childbearing years versus non-childbearing years is actually about equal. So you have a disproportionate amount of focus on fertility and parenthood versus the population. And also from an economic perspective, there is a very strong, within this group, a very strong economic power within this group that is being ignored as well. So one of the KPIs that we have top of mind is looking at increasing investment in the fem aging tech innovations. And the second, when we look at, we also looked at innovations that are focusing specifically on women of color. And what we found is that although at a surface level, at least, many of the innovators that we identified have some emphasis on women of color, we did find that a number of the innovations were not focusing on the specific healthcare issues that women of color are interested in. So for example, African American women are very, very interested in stress management solutions. We found very few FemAging tech solutions that targeted women of color, African American women, that actually focused on this issue: stress, anxiety, big issues among African American women. And so another KPI is not only directing more investment into the overall sector, but also directing innovation and dollars into solutions that are specifically focusing on the needs of women of color. And so that's a second KPI that we have.
Mhm.
I think a third KPI that we have that's a little bit more broad is actually changing the conversation about this issue entirely. And so that's the reason that we created this term FemAging and created this FemAging project. And interestingly enough, Denise would talk to me a bit about some of the conversations she would have with people. And they would say, why FemAging? Why FemAging tech? Why not this or why not that? And what we want to do is we really understand, both of us, the power of language and how you speak about things. And we see this every day in the uprising, and we see this every day in our political speech. The how people talk about things is very, very important. So the third KPI is we actually want to change the conversation, because the words that people use has an impact on the mind.
Mhm.
And then if it has an impact on the mind, it has an impact on actions. And then it ultimately has an impact on results. So just to kind of recap, we want more investment in FemAging tech innovations overall to close that disparity. We want innovations that are funded to actually focus on issues that women are interested in, and especially women of color. We want to change the conversation around this issue of female aging by changing the way people speak about this particular issue. And if we're seeing more conversations like the one that we're having right now, and people changing the way they talk about these issues, I think that would be very, very good. And all of this work is going to result in more economic power. In the previous conversation, you were talking about economic power. Corporations coming in and doing work that's going to be impactful. So we have a big vision for kind of our FemAging movement. And we have KPIs top of mind from the very beginning of this in terms of the first days. These are the first days of what we're trying to do. And earlier today, we were talking about metrics and goals.
But there's
So,
only
so we absolutely have all of that in mind.
the one thing when you and I, since we, been hanging out, you're not trying anything. We are a community of doers, and you are doing it.
Yes.
Done the work.
Yeah.
It's saying to try. People
Yeah.
that try sleep. They don't care about their kids. They're gonna pass on. They're not gonna be interested in aging. They're in a self-ish place. Studying and selling an idea and coming up with KPIs that will save the lives of women who are the mothers, grandmothers, and increasing their quality of life only increases the quality of life of our entire community. So thank you so much. Tell me about a couple of communities, companies that you were going to mention, and thank you for sharing your KPIs. I really respect that.
Oh,
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
So one company that hits really what women all across the board are looking for is a company called Gennev, Gennev, and they're a telehealth company. So what they do is they provide mind and body solutions for women experiencing perimenopause and menopause. So they have a cadre of medical doctors who are, focus on women, aging women all across the country. So, you pay a fee for 15 minutes. You want to talk longer, you pay a little bit longer. But this way, a lot of women who feel like they can't talk to their doctor or their doctor isn't listening to them, they have another option. And this is what they said they want. So that's one company. Medora is an innovative vaginal dryness company. That is non-hormonal. So this is really important. This is for those women who don't want to do hormone therapy and for women who have had cancer. And so they can't have hormone therapy type of remedies. And then one that we really love, and she's an African-American company called Private Packs. And this company helps to solve really important vaginal and sexual health issues for women. And then Farrar, you want to talk about maybe two other ones?
Sure. So, mental health issues are really important. And there's a couple of companies that focus on that issue. There's a company called Lisa Healthcare, which focuses a lot on the mental health issues that women are facing, things like loneliness, anxiety, depression. In fact, that kind of brings me to some additional research that we conducted with the FemAging Project, focusing specifically on COVID. And what we found is that with COVID, older women, this age group, they are very, very concerned and have the perception that the health impacts of COVID-19. I'm not talking about the immediate healthcare impacts. I'm talking about long-term healthcare impacts over the years and the decades. They actually feel that it's going to have an impact. And when we said to them, well, what kind of specific conditions are you concerned about? And they mentioned stress, anxiety, sleep, things like that. And so the reason that we talk about this and did this work is because there's a perception that people would like to have that COVID is a temporary thing. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 is going to be with us for years and decades. And so focusing on the fact that these older women in their wisdom are saying this is not going to disappear tomorrow, and we're going to be dealing with this for a long time to come, is critical. And so companies like Lisa Healthcare that offer offer stress and anxiety solutions from a digitally, so that people all around the world can access them, I think is very, very important. There's so there are a couple of other companies that I could mention, but the one thing that I want to do, rather than talk about a specific company, is just talk about the FemAging 20 overall, the FemAging Tech 20. What we found in the way that we chose these particular companies is we looked at the data that we gathered about what women want. And what we found is that they were, Denise mentioned vaginal health. She mentioned bladder issues around incontinence. She mentioned sexual health. She mentioned vaginal health. These are not things that people are talking about on a regular basis, but they're on the minds of older women. Mm-hmm. And so the FemAging Tech 20, what we did is that we looked at what they, across about 7 different categories and 50 different subcategories. And we examined these companies in great detail to determine whether or not they actually are aligned with what women really want. And so all of the companies that you've heard me mention and Denise mention are well aligned with that. And so we have a metric, back to the KPIs. We have a metric in terms of looking at these companies that we're highlighting, not because they're famous or they received a lot of investment, but because they're aligned with what women want. And that can be a roadmap for innovators to develop solutions that are going to be effective in the future. So thank you, Denise, for allowing me to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Denise, we got 2 minutes, and I want to make sure that you get in the last of what you imagine our community needs to know so desperately, particularly right now, while they have plenty of time to study.
Well, I just think that in our community that we definitely—
Hold on, Denise, we're going to do this one more time.
Okay.
I believe that FemAging is—
FemAging is critical. It's important now, today, right in this moment. Every day, 6,000 women go into menopause. That's 2 million women a year. That's in 2025, 1.5 billion women in the world will be in the menopause years. We can't ignore these women any longer. And that is such a huge opportunity. So for anybody that is listening that has any kind of idea or innovation to help these women along what we said, get the report so you know what it is the women want. Again, to what Farrar said, don't make technology for technology's sake, make it for something that is going to be useful. So we talked a little bit about what it is, but we have a roadmap in the report that we did. These women are important. These are us. These are our sisters. These are our mothers. These are our friends. And these are women, the younger women are going to grow into. And I like to get it started right now, right? These women right now are very frustrated, and it makes no sense for them to be frustrated. And I don't want, and these people cross this generation, get this, they're millennials because the oldest millennial is now 40. They're Gen X and they're baby boomers. So we're crossing 3 generations of women that we're saying is not being adequately serviced in the products and services that we currently have in the marketplace. And I like to see more African Americans on our top 20 list when we do this next year.
FemAging.
Femaging.com.
Femaging.com. Well, I really want to thank you both. Probably my challenge to both of you is a set of KPIs that really focus on the area that you had for us, but just the top 10 that women and families, because I think it has to be a whole family conversation, can bring. What are those top 10 for our FemAging issues that we know we need to focus on? Obviously, tech is part of it, but I just think the mask of women's health, period, because many times they sacrifice their health to help us. So I want to thank you for being a part of Seat at the Table. Let's stay in touch.
Yes.
Feel both of you committed to, shorten the idea, shrink it down, give me an op-ed and a 1-minute video so we can get something up for you and let you know we love you and we really appreciate you here at A Seat at the Table on Rolling Out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Peace to everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. It is Rolling Out, Seat at the Table, and it is that time. We are still here. Megan Sun and Dr. Hopkins are joining us. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, I'm here.
What's going on?
Keeping my head above water the best way I can. Glad to be here, though. Glad to be here.
No, welcome to Rolling Out. Hey, Megan Sun.
Hi, how's everybody doing? Everybody had a little taco for Taco Tuesday?
Waiting to get to it.
I did.
I got to work. I didn't get any tortillas delivered, so maybe that's why I didn't have Taco Tuesday. I don't eat a lot of tacos, but I'm trying not to gain any weight. So bread versus cake, I'm gonna go with cake. So.
I don't know if that's how that works. I don't think that's how that works. It sounds like you're pimping in reverse a little bit.
I'm gonna get some flour, put some sugar, some water.
I'm not the doctor, but I'm just saying.
A little chocolate, something. I'm gonna go with a carb. It ain't gonna be no taco, but welcome to Rolling Out News Report. I know we're all to an assessment. Megan, I can actually check out, and you can roll forward. I clearly don't have to lead the discussion. I think y'all are too capable.
Yeah, I started out, talking about something like talking about Taco Tuesday, just because I think, everyone is just going through really uncertain times, being isolated, going through difficulties with health, even losing family members to COVID-19, and then rolling that into a broader discussion and a real shift in the conversation on civil rights. We're talking about protests in all 50 states. I don't know the numbers and I'm not sure what the history is, but I don't know many times where you see protests in all 50 states in the middle of a pandemic when people aren't even supposed to be outside. But I think it's really an outpouring of what a lot of people are experiencing, I think, from a mental health perspective. which is why I'm really happy that Dr. Justin Hopkins was able to join us today so that we
Thank
can
you, Doctor.
unpack a little bit of that.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you so much for having me, both of you. I mean, this is a real pleasure, and I can, I'd love to
Does that
have
mean
this
you're gonna send
discussion.
me your glasses or something? How sincere that was, Megan. You know. Thank you, brother, but I'm gonna keep my glasses.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, you know, the culture is really shifting in terms of our conversations about mental health, and it's never been a more appropriate time for us to have this discussion when there are so many things raging war on our mental health. This pandemic has certainly made a colossal shift in our day-to-day lives, our quality lives, the quality of our social connections, as well as the continued racial unrest and recent exacerbation of it, both within our government, but also within the recent police shooting deaths of Breonna Taylor, right, George Floyd. There's also Ahmaud Arbery, right? There's so many, right, that we've seen. So we're dealing with a lot, particularly within our Black community. There is so much that we're dealing with. We know COVID is affecting us more, and many of us are still essential workers that have to go out and manage the uncertainty of risking ourselves, but having to do that for our own economic benefit. And then also dealing with the real realities that our lives are not being valued or respected still in this country. So in terms of talking about mental health, right, we are and have been in a crisis, and it's only exacerbated by recent events. So I'm happy to be here. And just to share a little bit about me, so I'm a licensed psychologist in Washington, D.C. I have a private practice which focuses on, I provide trauma-informed psychotherapy for adolescents, adults. I work with couples, I work with families as well. The majority of the individuals that I work with are people of color, are those who identify as being on the margins or having aspects of identity that are not typically validated in society, right? And so-
That sound like all Black people.
What's that?
Sound like all Black people.
It's a good portion, right? Because
Right.
a lot of us want to see a Black therapist, right? Because we feel like the odds are higher that we won't get invalidated if we have someone who shares an identity with us and can relate to us a little bit more. So that's the kind of work that I do. That's the lens that I'm bringing here, and I'm just honored to share in this discussion, because I think we all have something to say about mental health, especially in this time, because it affects us all, the time, but also mental health.
Right. And I think it's important, just jumping off of what you're talking about, trauma related to identity, and the moment that we're in, right? I think I'm an attorney in DC, and I thought this conversation would be a great one to have, because in my sort of groups of colleagues or peer groups, we're all having these private conversations with therapists, sort of unpacking our feelings and talking about our roles within our organization, sort of explaining to our white colleagues and counterparts sort of what we're going through, or trying to explain to them the moment, and explaining things that seem obvious, and it kind of almost feels like another form of like a microaggression, because you're feeling, once again, like you have to like validate the obvious.
Right.
Could you share some, could you help us unpack that and tell us a little bit about like how we can deal with that in a constructive way, instead of sort of kind of walking away feeling burdened by those experiences?
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is that it is burdensome, right? That's the unfortunate thing. I remember when COVID first broke out, and a lot of folks, a lot of companies started transitioning into people working at home, right? And there have been a number of things that have been written about how that transition into working from home actually illuminated to a lot of white America the real life financial disparities that that exist between white America and Black America when you are put on these virtual meeting calls and you can see more of people's lives. You can peer into their homes a little bit more. And there are Black people sitting on the other side of the screens who are already weary every single day of how they're being viewed by their white counterparts and colleagues, mindful of how they're going to be sized up. We know that we're more likely to be scrutinized at work, more likely for our efforts to be kind of overlooked or put aside, right? More likely to feel uncomfortable, excluded. So that continues even though we're working from home. When we see we're thinking about our colleagues, what they might be thinking of us or how they might be viewing us when they're seeing a little bit more of our home space, right? So the stress doesn't really go away even when we're not exactly in the workspace and we're still interacting with white America on a daily basis. And I think for us, you know, it's always been our status quo and the expectation that we be strong. We have to get we have to be twice as good to get half as far. And Munson, I don't know about you, I am a football fan. I think the NFL has got a litany of issues, and I'm very much pro Colin Kaepernick, but I love football. But one thing I do know is that research shows that black quarterbacks are benched twice as often as white quarterbacks, no matter their stats. They can have the same quarterback rating. And teams typically do worse after that quarterback is benched, which actually does affect money, but teams still do it, right? Because black quarterbacks are scrutinized more. There's research to show this. It's for years and years of research, right? And so that happens in other industries as well. And I just think, right, like these are the kind of pressures that we know that we have to be twice as good to get half as far, that stress is always on us, right? And so we hold ourselves to this level of trying to be strong, push through. We have to be resilient. We have to be robust, have a lot of internal fortitude, and we do. But we're also human, and it's okay for us to not be okay. It's okay for us to be stressed. It is okay for us to really feel burdensome and to have any sort of emotional reaction that we have to the things in life that are challenging. And I think when we can kind of say, hey, I am feeling this is impacting me, this does hurt, or this is stressful, and that's okay to say that, we can also acknowledge that it's not fair that we have to be that resilient in the first place. We can both be resilient while also acknowledging the injustice and not invalidating our experience of having to deal with it. So those interactions are really, I think they are stressful. And I think it's important for us to name it so that we can put words to it, we can organize it, we can validate our experience, and then from there operate from a place that has empathy for ourselves, but also allows us to move forward.
Right. Because I think we all kind of identify like feeling like a bit more like tired and weary. Like I kind of coined the term, like I feel like sometimes in my job, you know, I'm in public affairs and government affairs. I feel like the Black sensitivity police. Like I feel very scrutinized about like what I'm writing, and also advising, you know, other folks who are in my firm about like what we're supposed to be writing. And it's difficult. But I think that, you know, I've seen a therapist before and I found it to be very helpful. But I think some of my friends and family are going through similar experiences, but they're not as accepting or not as open to the prospect of, you know, seeing a physician, or sorry, excuse me, a psychologist.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about, you know, how you've sort of introduced some of your patients to therapy, like conversations, for example, if you had therapy, like talking to your family about it and how they can sort of use that as a tool to sort of get them through these times?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And I was even gonna ask you, Megan, like how do those conversations go with your family when you're trying to chat with them about therapy and its benefits?
You know, I'm Jamaican, so I'm a first generation American. And my family, you know, when we were children, is like, you know, you don't cry, you know, you don't really show weakness. You know, we're very proud people. We're very hardworking people. So like the prospect of like mental health and therapy is like, you're crazy. Like, what's wrong with you, right? So I think for me, I was going through my own transformation and my journey, like professionally. And I felt like I was stepping into a new space, and I realized that I needed tools in order to step into that new space. So I was sort of motivated from that perspective to at least give it a try, because you never know what it's like until you try it.
Yeah.
But you know, I think I made a little headway because I've explained to my family how it's helped me. But I don't know, you know, I think, you know, if you could give people like a little introduction into how best they could sort of approach that conversation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let y'all have it. Megan, I love you. You have done a phenomenal job. I am a real not football fan until the championship games. I cannot pay attention to anything that does not pay me. Given that most NFL teams do not pay me to pay attention, and you must at least do that as a business owner. So there's not a lot of reciprocity that I get from the NFL.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you coming on the platform. Megan, great job. I will not be here next time you sign on because you've done a great job. But Doc, thank you for the gift that you give to our community.
Absolutely.
And I really, I got the whole concept of football, but I just know that most of us are just tired of playing a game. I just think that the whole idea, the rules are never set. They're never clear. They never give up their race card. They never give up
Yeah.
their card. They never give up their microaggression card. They're always the victim. They always are going to mention slavery. There's so many check. But mental health is key. So I just want to check out right now because I wanted to see Megan. I hadn't seen her in a minute. She had checked in. And thank you for all that you give to our community.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
Thank you, Monson. Okay, so
Thank you.
yeah, so I guess we can go ahead and, you know, go ahead and answer that question, and we can go over a little bit more because I know we definitely wanted to talk a little bit about mental health for Black men. So let's you know, wrap up that question, and then we can move on to that subject.
Yeah, sure. So it's hard, right? Like for a lot of us, and I appreciate you like talking about like your family too, and like what it means to be strong, right? And what it means to be resilient, right? And what your family may have had to go through, because that applies to like so many of us, so many families of color, right? They've had to kind of there's so much that we've had to kind of hold together so that we can we could have some upward mobility in this society, right? So for a lot of us, it's kind of starting to try to break down that wall of associating mental health with this idea of weakness, or this idea that you can't both deal with mental health and be a strong person, right? Like it's like it's kind of like starting to break that down. And you know, the reality is like if you have a mind, you have mental health, right? Like if you have a physical body, you have you have physical health, right? Another analogy that I give people though is that like the one way that it's different, and reasons why like talking to someone is really helpful is that when you break a bone, when you break your leg, you know, you have a location for that. You see it there, you can put a cast around it, you can, you know, doctor tells you it's 4 to 6 weeks on crutches, right? That is all these different things. You see the injury. When you're dealing with stress or anxiety or depression, or you're emotionally wounded, it's a little bit more amorphous. You have to put words to it to organize it, to give you yourself the opportunity to process it, right? So that's why speaking with people, talking to one another, right? Like that talk therapy can be really, really helpful because it gives you the chance to organize and process things. So I try to normalize it and just know that we all have a mind and it has its health. And there are things that we can do to better care for ourselves. And we all need to be cared for in some ways.
Right. So I'm a woman, but I, you know, realize, you know, within our community, men and women have different experiences. And I think even more so, even with my Jamaican family, it's probably a little bit harder for men to sort of come to terms with mental health. And, you know, they have a different set of traumas from the stigmas and the realities of the biases in our society. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, your work focusing on Black men and mental health, and, you know, some tools that Black men can use to sort of navigate those issues?
Yeah, so this is a topic I'm really passionate about, and you know, being a Black man in this space, right? There are not many Black male psychologists, not many Black male therapists, and you know, I think we could always use more. Again, our communities have been through a lot, right? And I also think that we deserve to be understood. We deserve to have our experience validated, right? And I think men, we have a lot of hangups around that. We have a lot of, in this society, there's really isn't any place for us to be safe. We learned that over and over and over again. There's no space for us to really emote, to be to be able to express what we feel, right? We're often chastised. We often chastise each other under the guise of masculinity, what we think it's supposed to be under this really tight, rigid box, right?
Right.
We're socialized to kind of, be tough or be strong in the sense of like never feeling or emoting, right? But
Right.
I think so. We've got to, our identity and our idea of manhood often is wrapped up in these like less humane ideas and concepts that don't allow us to just really fully be human, and to feel freed up to just be who we are.
Right.
And I think that goes in tandem with the fact that we don't feel safe anywhere in society, right? So I think for a lot of us, we could really benefit from having spaces where we can unpack that stuff and actually learn how to understand ourselves and put words to the things that we feel, the things that we experience. And I try to do that work in my practice. I do work with a lot of Black men, trying to reshape and reframe the ways that we understand masculinity, and recognizing that, men are, you're a human, you're not a robot, you feel. To feel is to exist. We don't get to choose what we feel. We have emotions. They are valuable information into our subjective experience. We can learn the things that we need, how to pursue those things, how to protect ourselves and advocate for ourselves if we're able to learn about, if we're able to kind of understand our feelings enough. So I do what I can to kind of speak to masculinity as a concept and helping men to understand themselves in a more full experience of who they are, rather than having to follow a social rule or social concept that can at many times be really, really inhibiting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's really important work. And I think, just in the concept of talking about the moment that we're in, I'm sure that a lot of that is exacerbated by the moment that we're in, like seeing all of these images and seeing what's happening to, Black men at the hands of police and others. I'm sure that's extremely difficult. I think another part of the conversation and sort of the shift is corporations coming out and saying, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Black Lives Matter, and we're making pledges of $100 million for this cause or that cause. But I think that the overwhelming sentiment, at least amongst my peers, is okay. There have been decades and decades of this diversity and inclusion work. The needle has not moved at all. I've just looked at some stats on attorneys. We're looking at 85% being white, only 5% being Black, and that hasn't changed in a decade.
Wow.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience, doing consulting and diversity inclusion, and just talking a little bit about that space and how we might advocate for change, on these corporate boards and really, not entry level positions, but higher level professional positions, because I feel like the pipeline thing is definitely a myth. I think we're past that point. Just speak a little bit about your work there and how we can move the needle there.
Sure. And in the consulting space is really interesting, especially being a clinical psychologist, because I come at it, I'm not the one who does the interventions for the organization as in implementing strategies to address the issues. I am the one to kind of help them understand why there are issues. And because
That's wonderful.
there are issues in every single organization, right? And because organizations operate like individual psychologies and also group psychologies. Organizations
Right.
operate like families, right? People play roles. You have people who kind of drive things forward, people who pull things back, people who protect the status quo, right? And what we have to know is that the status quo everywhere is that in which people who are on the margins are subjugated. That is the
Right.
status quo, right? It's not enough to kind of be reactive to racism. You have to be proactive in addressing racism because it exists. So the way that it always exists in every single interaction. So that's kind of the baseline that I come into it with, is that race is a social construct. Social constructs are defined by the majority groups because of the power
Right.
that they wield by being the majority, right? So how those constructs operate, how they're operationalized, the majority group gets to decide, and it's usually decided to their benefit, right? So then those social constructs are active in all of our interactions, right? Those interactions in our decision making, right? Those decision makings end up creating organizational structure. They create economic gaps, right? All the decisions that we make, the perceptions that we have, then come out of our understanding and how of social constructs and how they're operationalized. So I go in with this very basic understanding, right, of what race does. Whether you will recognize it or not, it is operative, and you're doing things to your employees and yourself and the people around you that have an impact on your culture and ultimately an impact on your bottom line. And so how can we then be mindful of where those positions are, and what sort of questions do you need to be asking yourself in order to find those spaces? So that's kind of where I come in at in terms of helping people to understand race, how it impacts corporations and organizations.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful, because I think we're sort of wary of hearing there's been a racial sensitivity training, because that kind of makes the problem like the minorities are the problem, where it's like a complete social construct, and it's a part of the corporation as a whole, like as you said, as a family, and it just being something that exists. So I think that's wonderful. I know that we're sort of bumping up to the end of the hour. I just
Yeah.
wanted to sort of throw you the line and see if there's anything else that you wanted to share with us, or if you could tell folks where they could find you or hear from you again. I know that you've been doing some speaking engagements. Let us know how we can continue to learn more about you and your work.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I'm at drjshopkins.com, and also drjshopkins is my handle for Instagram and Twitter. I am doing more speaking and consulting around activism, race, and healing from a trauma-informed lens. I continue to see patients in my private practice virtually via telehealth. And I hope to be sharing with you all very soon a relaunching of a podcast about the unconscious mind, and it's called The Black Unconscious. And it's about basically just understanding the fact that, you know, we only know a very small fraction of our own experience. We download a lot into our bodies and our minds. And the more that we know about ourselves, the better chance we have at being healthy and living a more fulfilled life. And so I try to give some analytical and theoretical understanding of how we can do that work as people of color.
Excellent.
So
Well, thank you. Thank you
thanks
so
for
much for
having me.
taking the time. It's been so great catching up with you. Continue to do great work. I'm really interested in seeing, I think all of us are interested in seeing how, you know, the movement will progress. And I'm heartened by, you know, how often I'm seeing my friends really talking about taking care of themselves and each other. Like my friends check in on me all the time. You know, it's just tough sort of being isolated in these times. So that's really great. I'm glad that, you know, that conversation is changing. But once
Yeah.
again, thanks to everyone who's tuning in. We appreciate your time as well. Take care of yourself and each other.
Good night, everyone.